Hello, everyone. I'm Beth.
And I'm Steven. And today we are going to be exploring this crisp, refreshing, complex wine in your glass from Savennières. It has complex history. It's so unique. Rich history and complex tasting notes.
Comes from such a tiny part of the world, which we're going to talk about in the presentation. So it's really special that everyone's able to get the same bottle, let alone a bottle at all.
That's exactly right. And we're going to get into just how little production is made from Savennières and some of the unique things that we have as Americans as it relates to that. And so I just want to thank everybody for joining us this 2023 season. It's been a wonderful experience.
This is our fourth of four presentations. So thank you for those of you who've been able to participate, and we've really enjoyed getting back together again.
So on a logistical note, like long term, we do hope to do this again, but it will probably be about the same time frame where we'll do 4 events to kick off 2024. But we do hope to have virtual happy hours that are more ad hoc. Grab a bottle of rosé, we'll share some factoids, do some quizzes, and then share what everybody is drinking. So looking forward to that.
We are in a new location for those of you who've been with us before. So this is broadcasting from Castle Dahlberg. And we've been in and out of the office this week, so we don't have any quizzes this time, but we're hoping to have quizzes in the future because we do enjoy coming up with those questions.
And in part, this was inspired by seeing so many of our audience members having great big parties.
Yeah.
It's not just Beth and I today. We have a live studio audience. So, if there's some laughter in the background, that will be impressive because we're not funny. But, hey, gotcha. But yeah, so that's not a canned laugh. That is a live studio audience. All right, so let's just hop right into it. So everybody raise a glass with me. Cheers.
Cheers.
And feel free to sip along and enjoy. So Beth, where are we?
Where in the world are we? So we're back in France. We are going to focus in on a region that's in the northwest of France, the Loire Valley. This is a region that has a lot of wine. So a lot of different kinds of wine, reds, whites, sparklings. So when you hear Loire, it's actually a hodgepodge of things. It follows along the Loire River, and so it's kind of an east-west trajectory. And we are going to be zooming in on a particular area, the Anjou region. And in that region, we're going to be focusing on Savennières. Savennières is a nested AOC, AOP. We talked about nested AVAs in California at the beginning of this series, and now we're talking in France. In the upper part of this map, you can see the Anjou-Saumur region. To the east is Chenin, which is a really delicious red wine region. And to the west is Muscadet, another really famous for white wine region. But here in Savennières, we have a very specific grape, and that is Chenin Blanc.
Known for its complexity, and it's just so rich. And it is a unique wine that comes from Savennières.
Yeah.
We also...
here on the map, you can see the Loire River running here, and we're on one particular coast.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk a little bit about
the north
about
coast.
The climate
That's
there.
right.
So you can see
Stay
how it's all right there. Yeah, and before we move on, so in Savennières, the two nested AOC AOP are Roche-au-Moine and Coulée de Serrant. And Coulée de Serrant is actually a monopole, which we will talk about as well. But so these two subregions are some of the most premier sites in Savennières. But all of Savennières is actually really tiny. So the whole thing is a premier site.
So, and just to kind of put it into perspective, if somebody loves Burgundy, right, the Loire would be like saying Burgundy. Savennières would be like saying the villages, and then Roche-au-Moine and Coulée de Serrant is like saying
Romane-Comté
exactly.
or one of those.
In 2018, they actually applied to see if they could get that as a Grand Cru site designation, and that would have been pretty monumental. I haven't actually heard if they got that or not, but stay tuned for that. So if you like the wine that you're drinking today, then you could look for the Roche-au-Moine or the Coulée de Serrant. And if you find a Coulée de Serrant, my phone number is, call me up, I'll be right over.
Coulée de Serrant is regarded by some of our favorite authors as one of the finest white wines in the world. It is a really extraordinary wine, and it just so happens that this wine is coming from a plot that is very close by.
Indeed, indeed. If you like this wine, if you like to explore the Loire Valley, as we like to say, go to your local wine shop and have a conversation with them. Share what you like about wine, and they will help get you in a good Loire Valley wine. And this is what the Loire Valley looks like. As Beth said, on the north side, there's hills that exist, and
yeah, and so they're getting this great sunshine most of the day because the steep hillside goes down to the river. There's a lot of room to breathe and really great sun for the Chenin Blanc grape to ripen. But it's also a region that's reasonably farther north, so we're still talking a fairly cool climate. So these are not getting super ripe like the grapes in Napa Valley. This is more, I would say, akin to Champagne than Napa or Tuscany.
Now, one thing that you might notice in this picture is that in between those grapevines, there's a lot of grass and weeds.
Yeah, what is all that stuff, Stephen?
So they love, and we're going to get into this in a little bit. Biodynamic and that type of
organic and biodynamic are really popular here, especially biodynamic in Savennières. Yeah.
And so what we have is where they don't control, they don't till, and it actually protects the topsoil, because when there's a drought, all that vegetation dies, and it actually acts as a way to help keep moisture on that thin topsoil that we have in this region. So it works really well.
And the way they get away with not tilling is they use adorable animals. That's right. So they let cows and goats and sheep be really involved in the winemaking process. So especially sheep will be able to graze in between after harvest, and they keep that area fertilized as well.
Exactly. All right, so getting into a little bit of history, the Loire Valley and this region, really we get our start when the Romans, right? So as the Romans are marching, they are planting vines, and that helps the culture, but also it gives them, some great wine to drink while they're out in the fields.
Yeah, they identified this early on as a great place to grow grapes.
I was actually having a conversation recently, and they said that an interesting factoid with World War I specifically was that as part of the soldiers' rations, they were given 1 liter of wine per day. And so It allows people to really have this sense of running out into no man's land with no fear, and also just something that helped keep morale high.
Something to fight
times.
for.
Yeah. So, got that one. So the Loire Valley, in terms of being wine generating and that quality of wine, comes about from the Dutch. So they would come up the Loire River and say, we like that there is wine here, but we want it to be better. And so they encouraged this whole idea of the Loire Valley from an early time to be high quality wine production, because that's what they wanted to drink. And then at the beginning of the 19th century, we have the Parisians that go out to the Loire Valley with all of their money, and they build chateaus.
This place is full of Disney fairyland castles. The Loire Valley is just, for visiting, it's got a lot of beautiful stone piles to check out.
Exactly. And it's interesting because we have this money that's coming out here, and there's this influx of quality wine, but then phylloxera happens. And when phylloxera happens, we stop, basically, right? There is no more wine that's being produced. We have to replant, but maybe there's not as much money coming back into this region at that specific time. And then we have 2 world wars that happen, and realistically, the Loire Valley hasn't really come back to its heyday until the start of the 2000s, right? That's when we really start to see this influx of quality again and delicious wine, specifically like what we're drinking today. All right. Just more pictures. I mean,
look at these castles.
You could be on a boat drinking your wine, seeing this at this golden hour. It's beautiful. All right. So what the schist?
So this is a picture showing the Loire River at the bottom and a sort of drawing of what the vineyards would look like.
And so schist is really important because it gives this really strong sense of minerality in your wine. Mm-hmm. We also find volcanic soils, sandy soils, and a little bit of limestone in this area. One of the interesting things about having the schist is that it makes it super complex. It also gives a little bit of bitterness. People say that there's a little bit of tannin that exists in this white wine. And what's fascinating about that is that compared to other white wines, having that tannin allows this really high acid with this bitterness, and it goes really well with goat cheese. But we'll get into all that.
Yeah.
But it's such a strong impact, the terroir of this region.
You know, I looked up today to remind myself about what schist was, and it made me want to just grab a handful of it. So it's this type of rock that breaks off in very flaky bits. So you can kind of imagine little sheets come off. That's kind of what we're talking about with schist.
And one of the nice things, their topsoil is so thin, and you can see it in this top picture where the schist is actually visible at the top because there's such low topsoil, that we really get this heat conduction process, right? Where the sun heats up the rocks during the day, and then that helps protect the roots at night. So there's also like a light fog that comes through the Loire Valley, especially while we're on more of the coast. So if we compare some of the western regions like Vouvray, it's far enough away that it's not going to have this fog influence that the Loire, specifically the Serrant, or the Savennières region will experience. So getting into a little bit more as we talk about this fog rolling in, the mesoclimate influences, Mediterranean. We really do seem to like this Mediterranean wine, especially with this tasting package that we've had.
It seems to be going that way, doesn't it?
And so what we take away here is that there are 30 producers in Savennières.
So remember we said it's small. It's small.
It's small. They all know each other. And so really there's this ability to communicate about best practices and how to handle different vineyards or vintages. The production, right, is only 53,000 bottles. That is so incredibly tiny. I think we have another slide later that's coming up that talks about the comparison between other vineyard sites, but I think there's 160 hectares, which is about 350 to 400 acres of vineyard site here in Savennières. So when we compare that, I mean, in Virginia, there's some that have 200 acres under vine. One person.
Yeah.
And so this whole region.
Yeah.
So when we start thinking about Chenin Blanc from Savennières and people start talking about the tasting notes of Chenin Blanc, we really want to think about it from the source, right? From what do people say about Savennières Chenin Blanc? How does it represent here? Because again, the terroir is very unique and it presents in complex wine.
Yes, it expresses differently because I think a lot of people I know, when they think of Chenin Blanc, they think about sweet wine. This is completely dry. And the wines from Savennières, actually, as of 1996, I believe, is the year they changed the appellation to require all wines named Savennières to be dry. And they have sweet versions so they can put an additional notification on the bottle indicating that it's sweetness, but everything needs to be 8 grams per liter or less, which means most of them are going lower, and it's an undetectable amount of sweetness, if there is any at all.
And I think that's really important because as the consumer, when we think about the Loire Valley, white wine, Chenin Blanc, it's Vouvray and Savennières. And when you buy a Vouvray, it is sometimes difficult to know, is it off-dry, dry, sweet? And so this really does communicate to the consumer that when you pick up a Savennières, it's going to be dry. And that's important.
Yeah, you will know. Or it will be, if it is a sweet one, it will be clearly labeled. So
yes.
You will know.
And again, if you always are in doubt, ask your wine professional at your local wine shop. But you can also look at the alcohol percent. But Chenin can run pretty high. So we're going to be looking for higher numbers than 12.
I actually heard someone say that Chenin from the Loire is kind of France's answer to Riesling. And I think, a lot of the same things we learn about Riesling are similar. That just like Stephen said, looking at the alcohol content can be a good way of detecting sweetness. They have a full range from dry to sweet. And
sparkling.
And sparkling, and it can be very complex when aged. This grape has excellent aging potential due to its body and acidity. some wines from Savennières I've heard can be aged 50 plus years.
Yes. And it is because
Wow.
of that tannin structure, that acid, right? That acid structure is really going to help protect that from the acid catalysis. It's going to help preserve those more fruity notes while allowing those secondary and tertiary notes that do exist. You want to make sure that if you age a wine, that it has those secondary and tertiary notes. And I mean, this is not a super aged wine that we're drinking. 2018 isn't super old as it comes to Savennières, but it's a great time to start drinking it.
Yes.
Because we're just able to explore those beautiful minerality notes.
It's just beginning in its drinking window. And sometimes what can happen if you're drinking too soon is the acidity and the minerality is too much. It can just kind of taste tart. And some people it's not showing as well. And for a lot of people, that's not what they're looking for. So going at least 5 years, sometimes longer to get started is when its drinking window begins. And some of these really special places, like we mentioned, Rochamois, Coulée de Serrant, and producers in Savennières, they really benefit from waiting. That patience. It develops into these extremely complex and beautiful flavors.
And so when we start talking about, Savennières, the Chenin Blanc from Savennières, it is its own category of discussion because when we look at Chenin Blanc, and up here we have a beautiful, wonderful tasting profile for the entire grape, but we can see that the majority of it comes from South Africa. And when we start talking about how much of it comes from France, most of this is coming from Vouvray, right, and other parts of the Loire Valley. And so when we're talking about trying to communicate to the consumer what the tasting note of Chenin Blanc is, it doesn't make sense to talk about the specificity of Savennières because once you know about Savennières, you go into a deep dive on Savennières specifically, and you can see the tasting note profile down at the bottom doesn't quite match up with the tasting profile at the top. It just has a different, terroir, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some overlap, but there are going to be very different flavors you can get and expressions. And also, a lot of the Chenin Blanc from Loire is not meant to be aged. It's meant to be consumed within 3-5 years. And this is really a different product.
Right. So as we see here, in France specifically, 9,432 hectares of Chenin Blanc are farmed. 200 is coming from Savennières. So, fun little factoid there. Chenin Blanc can be expressed.
Beautiful grape.
Beautiful grape. And it comes in, when we're doing it in the dry style, it can still have a pale color and an amber color. What we have here is we do have a little bit of a tinge of color on our wine. And as we get into the Coulée de Serrant and the Rochamois, Coulée de Serrant is doing early harvest and late harvests, right? The styles of these wines, as you allow a little bit of age to sit on it, more extra, like that extra ripening, right? Higher alcohol content. One of the other things about the Chenin grape itself, this berry cluster that you're looking at here, the skins are very, very thin. And because we have that fog that comes in, if we're not harvesting early, like if we have a later flowering and we're going later into the year when we're starting to harvest, botrytis actually starts to set in just a little bit.
But that's a good thing.
And that's a good thing, right? And so it is a fungus that gets on the outside of the skin, and the fungus takes out some of the water from the grapes, but in exchange gives a completely unique phenolic type of expression. And that's really one of the things that can add to that ageability and that style of wine. But it's also going to give a little bit of color to it as well. Okay. So it is a good thing. And so, some of the places like Coulée de Serrant will have early harvest, late harvest, and play with it. It's a really interesting thing, especially since they are so biodynamic. Having those early harvest, late harvest, and then blending the two, even though they're the same grape, same plot, just harvested at different times, allows some type of play in the cellar because they really do like. One of the quotes that he said that I thought was pretty great was, "The cellar is not a hospital." Right? It is a nursery. It's where you can take it and cultivate it into what it's supposed to be and let it grow. And I thought that was beautiful. A lot of the things that he says is very beautiful and ethereal. And that's biodynamic for you.
So what is biodynamic winemaking? We've probably mentioned it once or twice in the past, but I think it bears repeating. This was a style of winemaking outlined by Rudolf Steiner in the 1920s, and he did a lot of work also on other kinds of agriculture, but with winemaking, he created a system to be in tune with the seasons, with the earth, with the moon and the stars. And I love this. There are different days in the calendar month where you want to do different activities. For example, fruit days, you can work with the grapes, but on leaf days, you might want to pay more attention to the leaves. And we've also learned that this might play into what days they believe you should be drinking wine. For example, you could drink wine on fruit days and flower days, but they recommend not drinking wine on root days and leaf days.
I found that's because they actually say that you should be harvesting on flower and fruit days. And then you want to be consuming the wine on the days that they were harvested. So if it was harvest on a leaf day, then maybe you should be drinking it on a leaf day.
We could look into that.
We could look into that.
If someone missed
if they missed the window, then we might enjoy it best on a leaf day.
But they also believe in composting very seriously, and they love their compost, which is great.
One of the interesting things that they talk about is, when you have wheat grows very tall, almost no root structure, right? And so you can focus on how to make something grow the stalk and how it grows tall. With biodynamic, grapes specifically, you should care so much about the roots. What can you do today to make the roots better for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? These root structures, once they've been set for 25 years, it's hard to make up time. And so what can you do? And there's this whole theory about, as you were saying, having animals graze through to clear out the crops at the end of the harvest. Well, which animals go do that? And so some may need more of this influence of, I'm not really sure how far down that rabbit hole goes, but they have a way that they abide by their metrics in order to pick the animal for a specific area of the field because they believe that area needs work. And everything is in balance. And so Coulée de Serrant is probably he was 100% biodynamic.
Yep, and that's the Joly family, and they've had that property for some time. Many of the grapes there are 50 to 80 years old, and they take very good care of them. And he's been a big proponent, the current head of the family has been a big proponent of biodynamic winemaking and has been converting people over to the cause for some time.
And if you get a chance to be out there and you get an invitation to drink the wine there, like, it's beautiful. You have to take this long, windy road. You're driving slow. You're in the countryside. You're really starting to get there. And then you go through the gates, and off to the left, you see all the animals. And on the right, you see a monastery. You drive around the windy road, and then you can see the chateau. And all around you is just animals and birds and life and wine grapes. And it's just really transports you to someplace special.
Yes, I think we didn't mention it, but I mean, they don't use any pesticides. If there's any kind of issues with fungal infections, they are allowed to use a small amount of copper, but nothing like many mass-produced winemaking regions end up using. And I do feel like I promised I would say what a monopole was.
Okay, say what a monopole is.
So a monopole is a region that is a recognized winemaking region that is only worked on by one producer. So in the case of Coulée de Serrant, they have an AOC. So they are officially recognized in France as a winemaking region, but it is all just one producer who's making wine there. So kind of special. There's a couple scattered around France, but it's a unique
and
thing.
we had something very similar when we were in Italy last week talking about Super Tuscans, right? For everybody who is in our live studio audience for that one, or in our virtual audience. Okay. And also want to call back to the fact that there's only 30 producers. So one of them is doing this, and so that influences the other 29, especially because he can lead that charge. And you can see by the price of the bottles that consumers care about this. And so then for this specific region.
Yeah, I would like to say, and I hope I'm not too out of touch when I say this, but you can buy a bottle of Coulée de Serrant for $135, which is a lot of money. But you can drink one of the best white wines in the entire world for $135. There are wine regions where the best of the best go for $300,
right.
$500. You can't even get it. You have to get it at auction. So Relatively speaking.
Relatively speaking, not that bad. Exactly.
Maybe not so bad.
Yeah, it's fascinating. 2018, simply the best. It was a favorable spring with early flowering, which allows for beautiful clusters to form. And the early spring is going to set how bountiful your harvest is. There's no hail, there's no frost. There was a slight mildew pressure, but nothing outside of what they can handle. Here in the Savennières region, historic summer heats allow for early ripening, and that just makes everything easier, right? We don't have botrytis set in. When you have easier windows, you can pick when you harvest. You have options stylistically from what you pull in from the fields to make the wines. It can set your style of wine at having a really nice end of season.
And when you're in a cooler region, having a little more warmth is generally very welcome.
Yes, of course. We're going to get into our wine here. So I hope everybody's been enjoying the wine as they've been drinking it.
We've been enjoying it. I think it's delightful.
One of the interesting things about Savennières is that if you are a Parisian, if you're in Paris, they might not be drinking Savennières. They might have no idea that it really even exists or is special. Because as this wine became more loved by our wine buyers and our somms, the international markets picked it up immediately. They realized that they can make a profit, with the American markets because people like us are enjoying talking about really unique wines. And it does not get much more unique than Savennières. Even the Parisians don't really even know that this is something special, and they couldn't even get their hands on it if they wanted to. So the wine that we're drinking today comes from us from Wine Access. They put together a really nice tasting note, 14% ABV. It says enjoy right now, and I agree with that. For those who have been enjoying this wine this entire time while we've been talking, you've had about 30 minutes of your wine decanting in glass, or maybe you have a bottle sitting aside. This is one of those wines, these white wines, that as it opens up, as it sits in your glass, as it warms up to be closer to room temperature, it becomes more expressive. That super complex, unique tasting profile is just going to keep getting better.
Yeah, so you can age this wine as well. As you notice there, the ageability window, 2022 to 2033 is what they recommend. So if you aren't drinking this one, hang on to it. Maybe, next time you see a Savennière, grab some more, see what happens over time. But I think it's drinking really well right now. I do think you're getting some of the characteristics of a younger Savennière, along with some of the characteristics of the aged Savennière. So that's nice that you can kind of see both. So I'm getting some of those honey beeswax notes.
And those honey beeswax are just going to develop more as time goes on. Domaine, how would you say that? Fleur Parc? Anyways, it's a
my
park.
French isn't that good. I don't know my alphabet.
It's an old park from one of the chateaus. So the vineyard site itself was a park. So there you go, a little factoid there.
One more thing before we stop.
I wanted
to say that I think one of the reasons we picked this wine is we wanted to share with you our wine journey a little bit. And we want to thank you for coming on this wine journey with us. But this wine is one of the first wines that we ever had together that really, really got us digging into the textbooks, that really made us excited about terroir and understanding why this grape could taste like this in these places and here from this place. It tasted so much more complex and interesting, and it was a wine that got us into wine.
And so when we had the opportunity to put together a package and Savennières was on there, that was actually a really big goal of ours, to be able to share this with this wine tasting group that we have, people that are interested in kind of going on this journey. And so thank you. We know that it's not Tuscany and Champagne
or
Bordeaux. But you're here with us. You gave it a shot. And I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that the acidity and bitterness and minerality and the craziness was palatable and enjoyable. There are thinking wines and there are drinking wines. And this is definitely a thinking wine category here.
So thank you for joining us. And yay! Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. So we're going to